Welcome to the Mets pod. On today's show, the Mets clinched a playoff spot. Now we are on watch to see if it's going to be as division winners or in the wild card. Tylor Megill returns in a bullpen debut, and other reinforcements are on the way, including Drew Smith. The NL East stretch run is going to be crazy. Joe and I give our big predictions for the stretch run to end September. And as always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So reminder, subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, and welcome to the Mets are officially in the playoffs edition of the Mets Pod. Joe, we didn't do much celebrating. The Mets did a little bit of celebrating, but you know what? For all of the talk about how are they going to approach this since the division's not wrapped up, it's still a tight race. I thought it was very tasteful. I thought it was exciting. It was easy to be happy for Buck, the young players that have been with this franchise that have not made the playoffs, and the new additions that have been there but also soaked in the moment. So what were your thoughts as the Mets clinched an official playoff spot?
The funniest thing to me was when they interviewed Francisco Lindor, and he was like, it was classy, it was subdued, we have bigger goals. And then they asked Pete, so Pete, well, I have ketchup and mustard on the back of my head.
Classy.
So a couple different perspectives there. But, it's an exciting day. I mean, when we started this podcast, we were hoping that we were going to have a podcast like this, that we were talking about the Mets as a playoff team. And we're here. And I think it was kind of weird over the last few days when it seemed like this was coming, really soon. It was this whole discussion online. How should you react? I'm excited. I mean, I'm 34 years old. This is now the sixth time in my life that the Mets have made the playoffs. So I'm not going to say I was, pouring champagne down my throat, but I was excited. I enjoyed it. The Mets are in the playoffs, and I think it's something that, for some reason, it was frowned upon to be excited just because there's a bigger goal in place. We're fans. Enjoy it. Now, we got to enjoy it yesterday, and here Tuesday, they have another game against Milwaukee, and this NL East race is going to go down probably to the Atlanta series. So on to the next, but I think it was very much warranted to just enjoy the moment.
It's really well said. I think Keith had a good point on the broadcast that this is a team in position to win 100 games, and that's not something that you look down on. That's something you should be really proud of. It's really hard to do. It's mostly out of your control what the Braves are doing in your division. The Mets are in a really competitive division. There's two really, really good teams in the NL East, and one in the Phillies that are hanging around trying to sneak in as a wild card as well. That's for the most part, and the Mets, to be fair, for the most part, have taken care of business against those two teams. Yes, the series down in Atlanta, the last one was tough, but overall, the Mets are in the driver's seat against those two teams. They control their destiny right now. They should be proud of that. You could tell there was a feeling of, the guys doing it in Milwaukee, and the young guys. Nimmo was like, I've been with this organization since, 2011. This is what I've been dreaming of. So this meant a lot for this, because I'm a big part of this team that's making the playoffs. And I think there's a lot of confidence amongst them that they're going to take care of business to get it done as division winners as well. And that played in. It wasn't rah-rah, it wasn't spraying champagne. But when you see guys like Daniel Vogelback sitting in the corner drinking a beer, Pete walking around with 2 champagne glasses, they earn that, and nobody should take that away from them. Nobody can take that away from them.
Yeah, they should be proud. I mean, you're looking at, it's a 162-game season over 5-6 months, and, the Mets have been, for all intents and purposes, consistent almost this whole run. Like, obviously, There were some patches where the offense hasn't been good and some patches where the bullpen struggled, but there's no guarantee that they will win the division. Like you said, they control their fate, and, they have the ability to do so. But let's just, in a hypothetical world that they don't win the division, were they just never going to celebrate the fact that they made the playoffs? To me, that doesn't make, all that much sense. But like you said, it was good. It was subdued to a degree. It wasn't crazy. They didn't have to tarp up the lockers and everything's a mess and people just spraying champagne in each other's eyes. But it was nice. You saw all the champagne glasses nicely put on the table, and some guys drank a little more than others. And, I think it's cool to just enjoy it how you enjoy it. And, the Mets making the playoffs is a fantastic accomplishment. They have more to do, but it's now guaranteed that here in a couple weeks, the Mets season isn't over. We'll
And
see
there's
how
a
long
lot,
it goes
yeah.
after that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. No matter what, the Mets are going to be playing postseason baseball, and that's something we have not been able to say since 2016. That's something that you and I, since we've been doing any Mets podcasting, have never been able to say, and that's really, really exciting. And there was a lot of storylines at play, right? And you can watch them as the camera went around, the different faces, celebrating. But I think the players knew what this meant to Buck. That was the first thing that came to my mind as I watched them shake his hand and they went into the clubhouse. Marte even had the Theragun in one hand and lifted him off the ground. You knew that it meant a lot to them to play that well for him. Coming off MLB Network not that long ago. Buck was out of baseball. Buck is a guy that is respected around the league, great respect, but he also gets the reputation from a lot of baseball fans as the guy that has never been able to get over the hump as a World Series winner. And this is that shot, right? This stretch with the Mets that he's going to have is that shot. And I saw it on the players' faces that it means a lot to them to do that for Buck. And that's the sign of a really, really good manager, in my opinion.
Buck also hasn't made the playoffs since 2016, so he and the Mets are on the same stretch there. But there's no question that he changed the culture of this team. You saw just the way this team has played overall this year. So not even obviously in the locker room, we haven't had the same kind of issues. There wasn't the raccoon stuff, and it seems like previously there was something every day, every other day, something ridiculous happening with the Mets.
Always.
That basically didn't happen. And they played fundamental baseball this year. Like, how many times have we seen the Mets play the Phillies and these other teams that are throwing the ball around, missing cutoffs, doing just non-fundamental things? And the Mets were good at all of that. So whatever Buck says and does, I mean, it's clearly clicking with this specific team. And it feels like this is obviously a very special team that, like he said, is on the verge of winning 100 games. And, maybe they win 101, 102 games and the Braves win 103. Like, that happens. You can't necessarily control that, but this is no doubt a special team with a special manager and special talent on it that now that they're in the playoffs are a team that you have to look at as a World Series contender.
For a lot of guys on this team, it was a unique moment. Some guys, it was a first moment in general, knowing they're going to be playing postseason baseball. I think of Pete Alonso in that regard. For Francisco Lindor, it's I'm coming over here, and he did play in obviously big games in Cleveland, but now it means a lot as being one of the faces of this franchise on a 10-year deal to do it here. But for Max Scherzer, this is just another season in the big leagues for Max Scherzer. Wherever Max Scherzer tends to go, there are big baseball games to be played. And of course, that game on Monday being a big one, Max comes off the IL and not only throws 6 scoreless innings, not only throws 6 hitless innings, Joe, he throws 6 perfect innings. So for Max Scherzer, what a return. I am glad they didn't push him. I don't know about you. I had friends texting me, what are they doing? How can you take him out? I said, listen, my entire life I've been a Mets fan. There are so many moments where I said, do anything for a no-hitter. Do anything for a perfect game. I don't care about any of that right now. I care about October. I care about winning a World Series. And it was awesome to see Max smiling when he came out of the game, but more importantly, how he pitched.
I was saying this on Twitter last night and had some back and forth with people, and some people very much agreed with me and some people very much did not. But I'm on the same
Twitter?
Yeah, shocker, right? But I'm on the same page as you. Would it have been nice that Max could have completed a perfect game? Of course. Who doesn't like to watch a perfect game unfold? And, perhaps if he had not spent the time on the injured list and had kind of the 50-something pitch rehab outing, maybe he would have had the ability to continue on. But like you said, the goal is October. The goal is World Series, lengthy run into the playoffs, and you're wearing the people aren't seeing this, it's a podcast, but you're wearing the Bret Hart shirt today. So to make a wrestling reference, like the one day pop of like a big moment, it's great and all, but you certainly would have run a risk given Max has spent 2 stints on the injured list and he just came back. So it was the right move. Would it have been cool if he was able to continue on? Sure. I mean, of course, but the right move was made, and they're just trying to preserve Max because they're going to need him, obviously, down the stretch.
So, Joe, obviously the cameras were all over the Stars in that celebration. The microphones were all over them, too. We heard from Pete Alonso. We heard from Steve Cohen. Congrats to Steve Cohen on his first postseason appearance as owner of the Mets, and a man that is, in part, largely responsible for the Mets returning to the postseason. But I want to talk about unsung heroes, guys that might have never even been on the camera during the celebration, but guys that are a huge part of how the Mets got here. So, Joe, for you, do you have an unsung hero or two for this team right now?
I think Adam Ottavino has to be right near or
That's
at
where
the
I
top
start.
of the list.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he has an ERA below 2 now for the Mets, and he signed that 1 year, $3 million deal just like Aaron Loop did last offseason.
Pretty late.
Yeah, really. I mean, it was post lockout. It was whatever in spring training, and they just wanted to add another, at the time, middle reliever. And he has clearly proven to be the second most reliable guy in that bullpen. I mean, you have Diaz closing out games, and we've talked about Diaz enough this year, but at that time it was, all right, Seth Lugo or Trevor May are the eighth inning guys, and the other one's the seventh inning guy, and Ottavino will kind of fit in where he does. I know there was talk certainly when he was signed of he'll largely face right-handed hitting because you don't want him facing lefties. He's been good against both this year. Adam Ottavino for 1 year, $3 million, proving to be the second most reliable reliever in his bullpen because Lugo had his ups and downs. May missed a ton of time with injury. Without Adam Ottavino, I'm not sure where this Mets team is.
Yeah, he'd be right at the top of the list for me. A really fun comeback story with Ottavino, right? When you look at it in Boston last year, pitched in almost 70 games, 4.21 ERA, was, not bad by any stretch of the means, but gave up some big runs, and that year before was a disaster for the Yankees, where he almost pitched around a 6 ERA. At 36 years old, a sub-2 ERA, striking out almost 11 batters over 9 innings. He's only gotten better as the season's gone on. Ottavino has been an addition that I don't know where the Mets bullpen is without him, to be honest with you. When you look at the things that you can't see coming, right? Trevor May getting hurt. Trevor May, in a large part, being ineffective in high-leverage situations. He's paid to be a 7th or 8th inning stopper, and I don't know if it's the injuries. He's had his problems this year. Drew Smith had a really nice start to the season. Unfortunately, he got hurt. The Joely Rodriguez trade was, I don't want to call it a disaster because it's not that big a scale, but it was bad. It was a bust. It happens, right? Epler made good moves. He also made bad moves. Ottavino's the guy behind the best closer in baseball that, while Seth Lugo's worked through up and down struggles, Ottavino's found it, and Ottavino's found a way to get big outs for this Mets team. And it's on the deal he was on, the situation and the expectations, all things considered, it's been huge. One more for me that people might be surprised by, there's levels to this, but Tomas Nido, for me, is a little bit of an unsung hero for what Nido is. I understand. Nido's never a guy that you want starting, 100 games in a season or whatever it may be. Nido's not a guy that's going to be a starting catcher coming into spring training all the time. But James McCann got hurt a lot this year. James McCann, at times, was completely ineffective offensively. And he's been better in September, but McCann's been a disappointment with his contract and, unfortunately, injuries that are out of his control. Nido now is quietly batting .245. For a backup catcher, it's not the worst. But it's the hits he does get, Joe. There's big hits from Tomas Nido sometimes. And defensively, he's a very active player. He moves well behind the plate. He calls a good game. He clearly puts in the work with the staff and prepares as a starter, even though he's slotted into a backup role. I know Nido is low on the list of impact Mets, but I think it's funny how nobody ever discusses him. But the reality is, the Mets could have been in a much worse situation than Tomas Nido with their catching situation the way it's developed behind McCann.
I like the group Nido with Eduardo Escobar and Mark Canha and those guys that, while maybe they weren't so consistent throughout the entirety of the season, we've been talking over the last few weeks. All right, there's Pete Alonso, there's Brandon Nimmo, there's Francisco Lindor, there's the stars at the top of the lineup. They need to get something out of the bottom. And, I mean, honestly, for the last couple weeks, they've almost been carried to a degree by Tomas Nido. McCann, when he plays, has been better in September, like you said. Eduardo Escobar's been fantastic. Mark Canha has been good for probably closer to a month now. So just getting contributions from all levels of the lineup, it's complementary baseball. Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, those guys, they're going to have their ups and downs. When they're down, you need other people to step up. And I think over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, those are the guys that have really stepped up. And I think that's a huge thing because, as much as we like to say each game is one of 162, we know once you get into August and once you get into September, it's different baseball.
All right, let's look too far ahead right now because we're in the spirit of the playoffs. It's game one. It doesn't matter, wild card, division round, it doesn't matter. It's game one of the playoffs right now. The Mets have a healthy Max Scherzer. The Mets have a healthy Jacob deGrom. Joe, you are Buck Showalter or you are asking Buck Showalter. I don't care which way you go. Who gets the ball to kick off the playoffs?
So I actually thought about this a lot. And when I first read it on our rundown, I was just like, oh, Jacob deGrom, that's easy. He's the ace of this team. But I'm kind of leaning Max Scherzer.
Really?
Because I'm thinking, when you think in a series like this, there's a possibility that you're going to need to bring back a starter on short rest. Who are you more confident that you could bring back on short rest? Max Scherzer or Jacob deGrom?
Good point.
And I think the answer is Max Scherzer, but maybe it's not. I think it is. Either way, it's obviously a luxury to have both, and I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but I look at Max as a guy that in game one, I'd be more confident in him going deeper into the game, and if I need to circle back and get him back shorter, I feel like it's more likely that Max could pitch on 3 days rest, which is often a conversation in the playoffs. I think it's more likely you see him effectively do that than deGrom.
So I didn't think of that. And it's sold me a lot because I, like you, thought about this question the most out of our rundown today. And I really went back and forth. And I came to the conclusion of deGrom for this reason, as much as I like yours just as much. If you start deGrom game one, and I know they're going to push deGrom in the playoffs. I'm not, there's no lack of awareness with that. But my thought still is deGrom has struggled in sixth innings at times this year. deGrom might not be pushed as much still, even with all of that being said. Let's assume deGrom gets the ball. He gives you 6 really good innings. You're going to need high leverage outs from Ottavino, probably Lugo, and of course, the Trumpets. That position, to me, sends you into game two, where, and I know they're going to push all the arms, even the bullpens included, but Max is a guy that you can look at when the scenario is behind you, and he can go into the game and go, I'm going to pitch 8 innings tonight. And I know Max had the problems in the postseason last year. I get all of that. But knowing Max the way he is, Max is a guy to me that maybe in game two, you need less of the bullpen, where game one with deGrom, I personally, people might not agree with this, I personally still think the Mets need the full throttle bullpen plan with deGrom, as he's shown he's wearing out a little bit in the 6th inning of games. Maybe that changes in the playoffs, but that's how I viewed it. I think both arguments are sound, honestly.
Yeah. And the reality is they have Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer, which is what we've been talking about since the winter.
It's a good problem to have.
If the worst thing is we're debating 2 of the top, 5 pitchers in baseball, 2 of the best pitchers in baseball, like what order are you going to pitch them? I think that's a great debate to have, but I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I'm just thinking from the theory of, like, what you're saying makes perfect sense when you're thinking about game 1 versus game 2. I'm thinking about, all right, game 1 versus game 4. Like, do I need to push someone on 3 days rest for game 4? And if I do, Max feels like he's a more likely candidate to take that than deGrom. But maybe deGrom will too, and I'm wrong. So
no,
either way,
think you're right.
Exciting.
I think you're right. I lean with your answer after hearing it like that, because I think that the good thing is, I really think you could push Diaz in the playoffs. I think Diaz has built himself up to being, I'm a 6-out guy when I need to be. I'm a guy that can pitch in back-to-back games if you need to be. For all the greatness of Diaz we've talked about this year, I think that is the thing that we overlook the most, is that Diaz, in big moments where he's needed to be pushed a little bit more, has answered the bell every single time. Where in the past, the problem with Diaz was if you override him, pitch him 2-3 games in a row, that's when he would have his struggles. And I used to complain about Luis Rojas with that, but Diaz has silenced all of that this year. And speaking of this exact scenario, we know the guys that are going to pitch in high leverage situations, but the bullpen beyond that is really important. Tylor Megill makes his bullpen debut. A little shaky. He did have some shaky appearances in the minors before that. Let's let him get his legs under him. Drew Smith is coming back. How does the bullpen unfold here? I mean, I'm at the point where it looks like Joely Rodriguez is in trouble and not going to be a part of the postseason roster, and that's fine. Do you think they can trust Megill, or is he on trial right now?
I think when you go beyond Diaz, Lugo, May, Ottavino, those guys, I think everybody else is on trial at this point. I think when you think of a Drew Smith coming back, like you said, he was really good. He's missed so much time, so he has to come back and impress. Tylor Megill is a guy you and I had talked about for the last month about the excitement of having him in the bullpen. Gives up the home run last night, but works his way out of it. David Peterson pitched really good Friday night, Saturday night, whatever it was, against Pittsburgh. Pitched really good out of the pen there until he gave up that home run late. And Joely Rodriguez is another guy that's even pitched good. I think over his last 5 innings, it's perfect with 9 strikeouts. So, I mean, it's small sample, but everyone's competing at this point for those final spots. And also what we have to realize is you don't need to carry as deep a pitching staff as you do in the regular season in the playoffs because you're riding Diaz, you're riding your starters. And, hypothetically, one of Carrasco or Walker's in the bullpen. So it's a lot of words to say. Everyone's on audition. Everyone's got to prove why they belong here over the next 2 weeks. And I think what will be a telling sign is what situations you see Buck Showalter put these pitchers in. I think that'll show from just the sheer what his confidence level is. I think that will be telling over the next 2 weeks.
Here's a wild card for you. It's amazing we have not mentioned him on the show. I'm sure there's people that were cursing during the unsung hero aspect. Trevor Williams. Is Trevor Williams just the Swiss Army knife of the postseason that if somebody gets in trouble early, he's a guy that can come in and give you length? Or is he a guy with May's struggles that Buck might be willing to put in a significant spot? It's a 7th inning. It's 2-2. I already have really been leaning on Lugo a lot, and Lugo's a guy that does not pitch well when leaned on too consistently. Does Trevor Williams get a look in those 7th inning spots to bridge to Ottavino and Diaz? I'm fascinated by his usage because every time he's been called upon, no matter the role for this entire season, he has answered, and I think he has earned some kind of significant expectations in October.
I think he's earned a spot. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying, pitch him over a Lugo or a Trevor May quite yet, especially in a big spot. But to your point, starters get pulled earlier in the playoffs. Like we're talking about Max going to go 8, Jake's going to go 6 or 7. But if Chris Bassett gives up 3 runs, he's getting pulled after 2. And then you have to make up all those innings. So a guy like Trevor Williams, I think, fits primarily in that role. But you also have David Peterson who could pitch in that role.
That's
like
true.
he doesn't necessarily have to be the quote unquote lefty specialist. He could be a guy that gives you length. But Trevor Williams has done everything this year to earn a spot on the playoff roster, and I would imagine he has a spot. What his role is, I think, is certainly up for debate.
All right. Reminder, everybody, you're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You could watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. NL East run, Joe. It's there's going to be nerves, there's going to be jitters, there's going to be pain, there's going to be celebrations. God forbid anybody beats the Braves. God forbid anybody beats the Braves besides the Mariners. Shout out to the Mariners. The Mariners are my West Coast team going forward until further notice. Man, it's going to be wild. It sounds like the Mets are going to have, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, some kind of lineup of Scherzer, DeGrom, Bassett down in Atlanta, it looks like.
That's what it's lining up as. So the Mets have it prepared right, and as long as nothing occurs or whatever over the next week, that's what you would expect down in Atlanta. And look, I said it a little bit ago, the Mets are pacing to win 100 games. The Braves are pacing to win 100 games. Feels like there's going to be a wild card team with over 100 wins, which is pretty crazy to think. And the Mets control their fate. And in Atlanta, one thing I think that's important is Game 163 no longer exists. So for the Mets to get the tiebreaker, they just need to win one game in Atlanta. And then they have the tiebreaker. So if at the end of the season they're tied, the Mets would win the division. But I ultimately believe that we're still going to go crazy day to day here over the next week and a half. but I think the NL East is going to be decided in Atlanta. That's just my feeling. Maybe it'll ride even to the last day of the season, but my expectation is in Atlanta we're going to have a pretty firm idea who the NL East champion is, if not officially with spraying champagne, etc.
There is some comedy in it that, despite all the talk of the series down in Atlanta, the Braves then play 3 with the Marlins, the Mets play 3 with the Nationals. The Marlins and the Nationals both have a chance to have a say in this. We will see if they do anything. So let's not forget, that is not the last series, but good Lord, is it the most pivotal one in all of this. All right, we said it. We're each going to do one. It could be a random prediction. It can be a bold prediction. It could be a simple prediction. Joe, back half of September, we are here. I don't care if they're playing the A's. I don't care if they're playing the Marlins. The Mets need to take care of business, and the Mets have important games in front of them to win the NL East. One big prediction here, Joe, for the back half of the stretch run.
Yeah, I don't care who they're playing. I don't care. We analyze this, it's kind of our thing, but the day-to-day, it's win or lose. For these few games, I'm done with the analyze this, analyze that. It's win, lose, and that's it. So they need to find ways to win baseball games. If it's quote-unquote ugly win, I'm fine with it. Yeah, just win baseball games. But if we want to go with a prediction, I see big things for David Peterson. I think he emerges through here over the last 2 weeks. I think he emerges as the priority lefty out of the bullpen. And, maybe he's that, like you mentioned about Trevor Williams, maybe David Peterson's the guy that's more likely to push for that 6th, 7th inning spot if necessary in a playoff game, especially if, there happens to be a couple lefties coming up. So I really liked what I saw from him this weekend. And David Peterson's the kind of guy that he can be so effective if he just goes after hitters. He has the stuff to get them out. When you see David Peterson struggle, it's often because he's trying to pick off corners and kind of make the perfect pitch. I think if he can just go after hitters, he's going to be very effective and play a massive role in the playoffs for this team out of the bullpen.
I like it. That would be huge for the Mets after all the talk. Plenty of it from me, plenty of it from you, that they didn't get a lefty in the winter, they didn't get a lefty at the deadline. If David Peterson can be that lefty in them for them in October. For me, Joe, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with the playoffs right now, but to get there and win the division, I think Terrance Gore is going to have some big moments here down the stretch run. I know he's only scored 1 run for the Mets so far. I feel like there's something with him and Vogie that we need to come up with. Vogie, who just seems to walk every time he's up, and then Gore, who seems to just sprint around the bases like it's Little League. I don't know if it's the walk and sprint connection. It's like the rock and sock connection right now. Terrance Gore, man, he is such a funny weapon. But when you listen to him speak, this is a guy that takes this role. He's not just like, I was born fast and I show up here to play. He was talking about the hours he puts in studying pitchers. He's a talented base stealer. He's very fast. Nobody will ever deny that. The guy can fly. But to steal as many bases or have that kind of role on a team, you also need to be a gifted base stealer in terms of the jump you can get, your awareness, when to run, when not to run. I think the Mets, and this could be, people can criticize their roster construction this way, but it's the way it's set up. With Vogelback being a guy that's going to have a lot of important at-bats, one way or the other, but the fact that he really can't run the bases, and we've also seen when they've had him run the bases, it can be a liability to his health, unfortunately, and they need Vogelback to stay healthy, to remain the DH. Gore, late in games, is a necessity. Am I nuts, Joe? I really think he's a necessity. Nobody throws him out. Half the time they throw the ball into the outfield because they overreact to him running, and then he goes to third, and then you have a guy on third with less than 2 outs where you need to get him home, which has not always been the prettiest thing this year. But I think because of the construction of the way they went with DH, and that goes for Ruff, too, if Ruff's on the bases. Ruff cannot really move that well either. Gore is an important piece these final 2 weeks of the season right now.
Gore is very fast, like you said, but it's not like he's the fastest player in baseball. There are faster players than Terrance Gore, so his attention to detail is huge. Because think about it this way. Every time Terrance Gore comes out of that dugout, it's after a Vogie walk or whatever. Vogie trots down the first, he touches the base, and he just takes a hard right. He goes in the dugout, and there's Terrance Gore ready to run. From that moment on, the other team knows Terrance Gore is running.
They know every time.
And they still can't throw him out. So he is a gifted base runner. He's fast. He's aggressive. He knows when to run, specifically within a count, as well as when he studies pitchers and he knows when they're set and they're going to be going home, because there's always the little quirks that kind of give away that you're going to try to throw over. So his attention to detail is great. And I mean, let's call it what it is. There's a reason this guy has 3 World Series rings,
yes,
including the last 2. Like, these contending teams realize the value that he brings, and it's not a value for a 6-month season. It's a value for the month of September and the playoffs, because everybody in baseball has somebody that could hit that's really slow in their lineup. And when you're late in games, you're going to want that guy out there. So having Terrance Gore, I think, is very valuable, and I consider him as much a lock to be on this postseason roster as anybody.
I'm with you all the way. Going back to 2014, that season with the Royals, he had 3 steals on 3 attempts. He obviously has appeared for Atlanta. He's appeared for the Cubs. The Royals in 2015, he did not play against the Mets in the World Series, but he played in the divisional and the ALCS that year. So Gore knows postseason baseball, and Gore not only knows his role on the team, but embraces it in a way that, I'll be honest, the way the game is right now, not a lot of guys are that type of play. Like, not a lot of guys make running the bases, stealing bases, and the IQ of being a base threat that part of their game anymore, where it's in the top 3. For Gore, it's 1, 2, and 3.
That's Terrance Gore. And I think I tweeted last week or something. It's like, there's not going to be another Terrance Gore. But no. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe there will. With the new rules coming, that you have the bigger bases, you have the limit on pickoff attempts. Like, that's going to have it. I mean, the whole goal of those 2 things is to increase stolen bases. They want stolen bases back in the game. But I don't know if you're going to be finding a guy that his job is hang out in AAA for a few months and play all the time. Like, Terrance Gore doesn't hit at the major league level, but he's in the lineup all the time in AAA. And then he gets the call and just runs in September for a contender. So I don't know if you'll be able to replicate that, but hopefully the stolen base is coming back in 2023.
Yeah, for those wondering, in Syracuse this year, Gore batted .241 and did not hit a home run, but we know he's not here for either of those things.
I was going to say, have you looked at Terrance Gore? I don't think he's hitting home runs. I mean,
it would be really cool if he did, though. Really cool if he did. Nothing would make me happier besides winning the division than a Terrance Gore home run if he ever gets to bat in the rest of the month of September. Let's get to the mailbag. Yeah, he won't be batting. I know, sadly. Let's get to the mailbag, because this all connects together. This one from Noah Schwartz, and this was a duplicate question a couple of times, but I like the way Noah framed his. He said, I made a mock playoff roster, and as I see it, Gore, Naquin, or Ruff/Vientos are fighting for 2 spots. Who should make it? I think Gore and one of the right-handed sluggers, preferably Vientos over Ruff. Joe, do you agree with that assessment that those 4 are fighting for 2? Because I don't know if that's, other people could have it shaking out a different way. And who would you keep?
I think they could fight for 3, but I really have to sit down and start planning a playoff roster. I didn't want to start thinking about it until I knew the Mets were definitely in, even though in my head we kind of knew they were going to be, but I didn't want to really think playoff roster until then. But I think there's room for 3, and it's as evident as possible that Mark Vientos is not a priority for them at this time, and I think he's here until Starling Marte is ready to come back, which we kind of forget that this team is playing good baseball right now. They're going to get Starling Marte back sometime soon, I would imagine. I think the expectation is he will be back before the end of the regular season. Hopefully by the Atlanta series would definitely be nice. But I think there's room for 3 of them. And, as much as we've given Darren Ruff the business, I think he's the veteran that's going to get that opportunity. And then I think Naquin and Gore both fill roles, because I don't think they want to put Terrance Gore in the outfield and potentially have him bat unless they have to. And Tylor Megill has done a great job as a 4th outfielder since he's joined the Mets.
Yeah, I think it's hard to see Naquin off the roster, even though he's had his struggles. It's just hard to see. I feel like he was acquired with the thought that he's going to be part of this team one way or the other. All right, sticking with the theme of playoffs, that's the theme of today's show. This is from Johnny. How does the current roster compare to the 2015 roster position by position? And we could be quick with this, Joe, because obviously there's a lot to go through. But the obvious for me is that the front of the rotation, in my lifetime, I've never seen the Max and Jake setup in front of a rotation. That's one for me. And then obviously, that the Mets have a premier shortstop and first baseman on this, and that team did not. That team had strengths in other areas, but we have said on the show a lot, the 2022 Mets are so drastically more talented than 2015. 2015's lightning in a bottle was really, really special, but this group is significantly more talented across the board.
It's a struggle to think of where 2015 was better.
That's the thing for me.
I like you said, the top of the rotation better here. And even Chris, when you go down to Chris Bassett, let's not overlook the fantastic year that Bassett has had here. The bullpen, I mean, you're talking about Edwin Diaz versus Jeurys Familia. And
Diaz is having a historic year for the Mets.
Little bit different there. And then on the offensive side, I would say not having, they have Alonso, so I guess in a way they have a Cespedes, but I don't see much of a comparison. I think I've said this on this show, I've said this on Twitter, I think the 2022 Mets are the best team of my life that I've seen. And, I obviously was young, but old enough to recognize the 99 team, the 2000 team, the 2006 team is probably the second best for me. Like you said, I look at 2015 of just a perfect storm. That's a team in June of 2015, we were talking about what pieces they were going to sell at the deadline, not buy. And then they went on a little bit of a run. They got the guys, and they had a magical run, and it was great. But from just a sheer talent standpoint, it's not comparable when you think about the 2015 versus 2022 Mets.
Yeah, 2015 had really odd things, right? As the Cespedes acquisition, everybody loved at the time, but nobody would tell you that he was going to have a 942 OPS for that second half of the year with the Mets. That's truly out of this world, even for Cespedes at the time. Only two Mets that year hit more than 20 home runs. Lucas Duda and Curtis Granderson. The 2015 Mets were just bizarre. They had Daniel Murphy, who nobody could get him out in the playoffs. They had the hot run from Cespedes. They had some big at-bats from players, whether it was Conforto when he came up. I hate to discredit them, calling them a lightning in a bottle team, but we were all shocked. I mean, the Mets were terrible for 8 years before that. And this year, I know every Mets fan is expecting the ceiling to collapse at some point, right? But we knew going into this team, how many podcasts did you and I do? This team has Max Scherzer, Starling Marte, an ascending Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor. It's loaded with talent. DeGrom was supposed to be healthy the entire year. He missed the first half. Imagine how many games they would have won if DeGrom didn't miss the first half of the season. So the reality is the expectations are higher for the 2022 Mets going into the postseason than they were for the 2015 Mets. And that could break your heart, or that could lead to the greatest Mets team that we've watched in our lifetime. We're going to find out.
Yeah, it's going to be one or the other, right? Because the reality is only one team gets to win it all. And the Mets have as good a chance, and I truly believe this,
as anyone.
As anyone. I think they have just as good a chance, if not a better chance than most of them. So they're in position. It's just a matter of how the ball falls in October. Like you said, Daniel Murphy was a guy that nobody could get out in the 2015 playoffs. Who's that guy in 2022? Kind of remains to be seen. But I believe in this team. I think it's, like I said, the best, the most talented team of my lifetime. And I have expectations that they can be a World Series contender. And I think it's something that's going to continue on, which is the exciting thing. I don't want to look too far ahead, but it's exciting to look ahead and think, the 2015 team, it was all right, they made the playoffs. When's the next time they're going to make it? Now you're thinking about the 2022 team. I think they're going to be back next year too. So hopefully this is the magical run that we've waited our entire lives for, because neither of us have seen a World Series championship, so we're ready for it.
No, it's crazy. In our years, both of us have been watching the Mets for 30 years, and we haven't seen it. And it was interesting listening to Steve Cohen talk in the visiting clubhouse after the game, because there was a feeling of pride, but there was also a sense of this is where we're supposed to be, and we have a lot of work left to do, and we plan on being here for a very long time. And I think it was nice not to see him, drop the ball before crossing the goal line, in a sense that there's an awareness here, like, this is special and they deserve to be celebrated. And he went out there knowing that they would get the job done to come down in the clubhouse, kind of celebrate, but also speak to the media. But it's different with the Mets right now. The Mets have expectations to be one of the best franchises in baseball. And so far this year, they have lived up to that. But it's great to know going forward that there's a longevity part of this. Not a, hey, we built all of this for 8 years in the minors and it all worked out. There's a part of this that goes, we're always going to do whatever it takes to get better. And even if we do win a championship, which obviously for you and I, that would be enough, there's going to be expectations to keep contending for championships.
That's the price you pay when you want to be the top payroll in baseball and invest everything that Steve Cohen did. And I mean, if you know anything about Steve Cohen and his life outside of owning the Mets, he accepts nothing but the best. So that's my expectation of what he's going to bring here.
All right, Joe, before we close the show here, a pivotal stretch run for the Mets that hopefully there will be another podcast soon of us celebrating a celebration, in a sense. And maybe this one with champagne actually being sprayed all over the home clubhouse would be nice. But tell you what, wouldn't mind it in the Atlanta clubhouse either. We'll see about that. But closing thoughts here, Joe, for this episode of the Mets Pod.
Everyone, take a second, enjoy it. Don't worry about, what's to come. What's to come is still in front of them. They're going to be working towards it, but enjoy the fact that your New York Mets, because if you're listening to us, they are your New York Mets. They're going to the playoffs, and it's an exciting day. Enjoy it. Because we often are always pushing the goalposts back, and it's like, okay, what's next? What's next? Take a second, enjoy it, and there's going to be exciting postseason baseball at Citi Field, hopefully for a lengthy period of time over the next month.
All right, a little update for everybody. Next week, we will be having a great guest join the show. We are on our regular podcast schedule through Tuesday, October the 4th. So if you're used to just downloading this podcast every Tuesday, that's not going to change until at least October 4th. Then the playoff shows will be arriving. We will get you that schedule as soon as we can. Just know there should be more of us with the playoffs, or based on when the Mets take care of business, because we expect them to do so. So stick with us right here on SNY's The Mets Pod. And a reminder to subscribe to The Mets Pod. If you haven't yet, what are you doing? The Mets are playing meaningful baseball up ahead. It's going to be fun. Joe and I always have a great time talking about this team during the lows. It gets even better during the highs. So subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.